Hi, Go Be Society. Good evening. It has been a while since our last live, and I am so glad to be able to do a live again. This is great. So, I am going to welcome everybody and tell you all how excited I am to be back. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. As many of you have expected, it is back to reality, back to after 2-week hiatus, and it is really nice to be back. But while I am back, I am introducing a new month topic, which is the month of April anxiety. And how better to go into the post-holiday feel than to introduce the concept of anxiety and to feel really the camaraderie of everyone who is kind of jumping back into a real life transition. So welcome everybody, and I'm just going to give everybody a few more seconds to come on. I'm always early. Welcome. And many of you sent in questions and comments about anxiety, and I hope to really get to them and to address it. But I think for this week especially, not only as both as a mom and a professional going back to the reality of what life brings, but I think it was important to recognize that I had patients who I had one patient whose family got a dog this week, and she's particularly fearful of dogs, so we'll deal with that kind of anxiety. Another girl who honestly hadn't been to school in 8 weeks because there was Zoom, and then there was the holiday, and then there was the pre-holiday off, and really being very uncomfortable about going back to school. I have several parents who have said that they've raised their voice and been so bossy all week long trying to get their kids back into a routine. I have a mom who has absolutely boycotted and refuses to do any laundry because it is just so overwhelming to think about how much laundry she has to do since the transition back from the holiday. I have so many bedwetters now because of the transition, and it's been very hard to get young children to go back to school after a long holiday. There are plenty of kids who are not on a good sleep routine just yet. So where do we go with all this? Is it even worth it to have a great holiday or break for a certain amount of time only to go back and to be like, this is just very overwhelming? So let's see, everybody, where anxiety fits in, what it really means, what it doesn't mean. And to start with, I want to understand what this word anxiety really means. Is it a negative word? Is it an enemy that we all have? Or is it something different and something we can understand together? So let's start. Anxiety is a normal reaction, okay? It's a normal reaction to stress, and it actually can be beneficial to us. Yes, we don't want to get rid of anxiety. Rather, we want to perhaps tone it down or use it to our advantage. So what does that actually mean? Are you kidding? Like I'm supposed to have anxiety? Like that's not a bad thing? So no, it is not a bad thing. And I just want to take, for example, what is the reason why a child would run into a street where there are cars kind of going by and then pull back and go back onto the curve before getting run over, God forbid? So the answer to that is because there's a feeling inside. There is that feeling of there's a dread, there's a danger that the child feels and senses, and that is the feeling that pulls the child back not to be in danger. And what does that mean? That means that anxiety is actually helpful. many of us as working moms or as moms in general have really had to push ourselves to our limit this week. Where did we get that drive? Well, a lot of what we were thinking about as an impending doom or things that could possibly go wrong created that feeling inside of us that made us kind of go forth and push forth and do what we had to do. And that a lot was in part to this feeling of, there might be something might happen otherwise. And for that is the anxiety talking. Anxiety can not only be something that is going to bring us fear or dread, but it also could be a motivator. And so when we want to understand anxiety, we have to understand that it is a feeling, and all feelings, there is a place for all feelings. We just have to make sure that we understand what that place is and use it to our advantage. Okay, so if anxiety is not my enemy, and I guess you could say it could be my friend, how do I know when anxiety is too much, when it is, a friend, or when it is not so much of a friend? So the answer is in a mnemonic that I call FIT, right? Is it fit to be my friend right now? FIT stands for frequency, right? How often do I feel anxiety? Is it all the time? And if so, that's a lot. That's like that feeling, that intense feeling of worry or dread or discomfort, or that there's a danger all the time. So that is significant. I is intensity. How strong is it? Right? If it's affecting my functioning, if it's affecting my day-to-day life all the time, like that is a high level of warning, right? And T is time. How often am I feeling it? So the frequency is how frequently am I feeling it, the intensity of it, and the time that I feel it. Those things I have to keep in mind, because yes, anxiety is helpful, but if it's all the time or so intense or impacting on my functioning, that can't be helpful. And in that case, I would have to tone it down. That's for myself. Now, of course, we as moms, we're going to be looking for it in our children as well. And so we have to understand what it looks like for an adult and how that trickles down, and what it looks like for children as well. So in an adult can feel anxiety, and an adult can feel it both in either an excessive worry, okay, or physical symptoms like heart racing, sweating, shaking, our heart our body feeling the worry, okay. We can also be on edge. That's like what I was saying, how a lot of moms were telling me they just are on edge. They are been bossy and screaming and just like very, nitpicking about a lot of different things, having a hard time concentrating, okay? Like just really having a racing thought, like ideas going from one idea to another, just not being able to like fully be in the moment. Also feeling tired or lethargic, which is interesting because you'd think it would be the opposite, like if I'm on high alert, but no, the body actually gets really tired, gets very drained through anxiety. And then finally, something called like extreme fear. So if anxiety is like focused on one particular area, that would cause a phobia or a fear, so that it would be localized to something in particular. A fear of dogs, a fear of heights, a fear of, a lot of different areas. And sometimes like they're not even the popular ones that people have heard of. But there's just something in particular that's really fearful, fear of balloons, right? There are different ways in which a person can kind of like the worry gets localized to one particular fear. So that's how it would be, how we as adults could experience. In addition to which, of course, there is areas that could also be in irritability and, just that constant edginess. Those things are there also in adults. Okay, but now let's take a look and understand what anxiety looks like in kids. Okay, so in younger kids, you might get an increase in their temper tantrums, or you might get an increase in clinginess, or things that they were really good at from before, like being able to sleep through the night without making in their bed. That, kind of regression is pretty frequent. And like, just as I had mentioned about us as adults with lethargy, like we can be tired. So definitely sleep patterns and eating habits can also be off. And overall temper tantrums and screaming and crying, avoidance of different situations. Again, that's like where that fear comes in. So it really is, that's in kind of younger children. And I think that it's important to kind of recognize that, it's a degree to which, kids show what adults show in terms of anxiety, but you kind of have to, get a sense for really how it's a little bit different. And now let's talk about how anxiety shows itself in teenagers. So it really is similar to the way that kids show it, but I think generally speaking, because teenagers are their own population, so their edginess, they're feeling keyed up, they're feeling like not being able to concentrate or not being able to do their schoolwork. So, with teenagers, you never know if this is just like their thing. So you kind of have to feel it out a little bit more, but really, avoidance of different types of situations more. I think it's like what I was saying about the fit, just a heightened sense. So there's more of that edginess, and there is a more, or the more frequent of their, irritability and desire not to like engage, and their restlessness and not concentrating. So, those things, and physically, I think kids and teenagers are going to complain about, definitely like the stomach. The stomach is usually like that primary spot where teenagers or kids, really feel the physical elements of anxiety. And I think that that's something, that this week in particular, you may have noticed that a lot of the more anxious kids were just not feeling so well. They had a headache, or, their stomach was hurting. Especially, during these days where, if someone is sick, then all of a sudden they really get a pass and they can Zoom from school. So I do know that a lot of kids were just not feeling well. And with the sleep disturbances and children not being able to sleep as well, that definitely is, something that goes kind of hand in hand with not feeling well. That psychosomatic, my body is not feeling. I don't know that it's necessarily conscious. Sometimes it's not conscious, but I think that the overall sense of anxiety definitely impacts on the body. It's like the mind-body duality. So if you're kind of have these angst and the what ifs, then that definitely impacts on how the body feels. And so there's the achiness. So what I have right now, I have 2 points, which I'm going to get to, is where does the anxiety come from? So very good point, performing talents and mom to 3 Bs. Yes, I think that this is a really good point. Where does it come from? So it really is a combination of nature and nurture. Many children are predisposed to feeling the sensitivity based on their own sensitivity, their genetic makeup, their, kind of how they process information is going to then be impacted on what life brings them. So yes, trauma would be one very key reason why a child would feel anxious, right? But on a regular routine, weekly, monthly, yearly experience, kids go through a lot of different experiences. And anxiety oftentimes just comes from a sake of the point of going from stable to a little bit off kilter, right? When I am walking on just regular land, right, on my path, then my feet are firmly planted on the ground. But when I take a step and the step is uneven and I feel the shake, so to some children, some adults process that as being uncomfortable. And what it raises is it triggers in the brain that there is in the amygdala, in that center of the brain that brings in the emotional experience. It makes that there's a danger, that there's a fear, that there's an unevenness, there's something that is really uncomfortable. And so yes, it could come from a toxic home. It could come from a level of trauma. It could come from major triggers. But the fact is, it could also come from just being in an environment where your own sensitivity doesn't allow for the coping to what needs to get processed and experienced. There are plenty of kids who didn't experience a trauma, but rather went from warm weather and no expectations to structure and school and expectations. And that created bedwetting, and that created screaming and yelling and shouting and not being able to sleep. That created a huge amount of anxiety because internally that's how they process it. And so, yes, there is definitely the capability to experience anxiety because of trauma, but it also there is I guess what you were calling it, being wired to be overly sensitive to daily triggers. But there's that range from overly sensitive to daily triggers to being traumatized, and that your system could have handled, but it can't now because it's really experienced a trauma. And then, as you guys are mentioning, yes, there's a genetic predisposition. Anxiety is definitely something that could be genetic, right? It's not so much that it just came out of the blue, but rather the way the brain chemistry is also genetic. But it's interesting that it is not just one. And so there are plenty of parents that I have come across, plenty, who because of their own predisposition and anxiety are so overly sensitive to be able to provide coping tools both for themselves and for their children, to allow for there to be a level of, kind of stopping the cycle, and really, because of their own situation, being able to really be empathic, and also to be what is perhaps the best antidote to a stressful or anxious child. And so it is definitely important to recognize, as you guys are recognizing with me, and I see these comments, they're really important, that we can both recognize with ourselves as, as mom or as doctor, that there is a level of both nature and nurture that go into anxiety. And it is our job to be able to both handle our own anxiety, to be able to then handle what we can do for our children. And yes, how we can help a child with anxiety. So that is the next stage. And there are so many different ways to look at how we can help our children with anxiety. To start with, I really do believe that there is an importance with ourself to feel and to be a certain capability to be the one to kind of start the show going. And towards that, we have to put our own anxiety in check to be able to then help the people around us. And, I know that we're already past the Pesach holiday. And for those that don't follow all of the Pesach traditions, this might not resonate with you. But I have a firm belief at the start of the Seder with Kadesh that there is something that is really really important, a really nice and important message. So the question is asked, why do we start the Seder, which is supposed to be this unique experience, with Kaddish, with the idea of something that we do really twice a week, on Shabbos. So like, this is not something that is totally unique to the Seder. So like, if this is what we want kids to ask about, like that doesn't, that doesn't make as much sense. So the answer that I've spoken about in the past is that it's really recognizing within ourselves that we don't have to do much changing. We just have to, what's being expected of us? What is the most important thing? So the most important is that we transcend our best self. We just be ourself, but maybe ourself plus. We just do whatever we can. We bring out the best in ourself. We don't have to do something crazy, unique, and different. We just have to be ourself. And oftentimes when it comes to anxiety kind of tells us the opposite. It tells us, oh my goodness, what if? And it makes us doubt our capabilities. So the first thing to recognize, and this is something that I think would be really good to flesh out, is that we really just have to be ourselves. And if we can do that, if we can get back to that message of positivity within ourselves, then that can combat all the what ifs, the out of control, the what if, and the negativity that perhaps anxiety kind of brings to the situation. Now, I do see, as I'm mentioning this, that someone is asking about how we evaluate and how, based on parents' observation, how do we really truly evaluate anxiety? So just to get back for a moment to our FIT model. So the frequency, the intensity, and the time, if it's going long, if it's more than daily, if it's going for, 6 months, and if it really impacts on functioning, any of those things would really be a good litmus test for being able to bring it to a professional's attention. And I know oftentimes the first professional you can bring it to is a pediatrician. I oftentimes see parents that have already taken that step and gone to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician told them, okay, this you really do need professional help with. There are rating scales, and there are clinical observations, and there's a whole host of different ways that professionals can help to diagnose if there is anxiety that's happening. But I just think that the rule of thumb, if you can remember FIT, then that allows for you as a parent who is not a professional to say, okay, wait a second, this is a little bit more than just run of the mill getting nervous. Or this is just something that is really impeding on daily functioning. And this is kind of, that red flag that you might need. And like I said, if it's your child, I do not think that it is a bad idea, if you do not know a psychologist, to take it to a pediatrician. A pediatrician is not in the professional capacity to be able to tell you what type of therapy to use. That, I see here, the pediatrician advised play therapy. So I don't think that, I think that every child is different. The age of the child is important. And, for those that are not familiar with the different types of therapies, either play therapy or what we call cognitive behavioral or dialectical behavioral, there are whole different types of it. And I think that is something that, that I will be more than happy to discuss privately. I think for all intents and purposes, it would be important to know that the pediatrician is perhaps the gatekeeper. If you do know of a psychologist, or if it is something that is perhaps school related, oftentimes you can speak to the school psychologist just to pick her brain or to understand if it's a psychologist and she is bound by confidentiality, so you don't have to, kind of be concerned about confidentiality. But I think that is really important, that you kind of use your what I'm putting in place as a red flag, and then kind of take it from there to ask the professional. As I have mentioned before, there are 3 different sizes to problems. There is the small problem you can handle by yourself. Middle-sized problem is you ask for help from someone who you trust. And then finally, there's the professional. And I do believe that this would be an example of something that can kind of run the gamut. And if it is something that you feel like you need additional professional advice on, that would be a really good way to get that. Okay, so getting back to what we can then do about it. So there are so many different things that you can do about anxiety. Again, it's not our enemy, it's kind of our friend. So I think that, or somewhere in between. So, I was thinking about where we can start with this, and I feel like let's start at the ABCs. Okay. So A stands for adjust your expectations. What does that mean? So there is no reason why you have to listen to the voice inside that says, oh, it has to be perfect. It has to be this way. I have so much to do because I have, I built these expectations way too high for my family, and now I have to meet them, right? Anxiety says, well, what if you don't have the nicest, or what if your children don't do everything that they need to do? What if? And I think that especially during moments of transitions when we are not feeling like we are on an even playing field, that we're not as firm on the ground as we would like, then getting back to that idea of Kaddish, getting back to that idea of you have within your capability to be the best that you're going to be, and that's enough, and that is more than enough. And the idea being that you have to have all of your ducks in order right now is the anxiety talking. There's no way. You do not need to. You just need to get through until you get through. And adjusting the expectations, setting the bar in a way that is not as high as you're setting it, could really help. If you set the bar so high that the only thing that you can do is get a splinter from it, that's not going to work. So it really is important to adjust your expectations. I know of a family where the mom, she really, really cares about cleanliness and organization and neatness. And so when she was flying back from the family vacation, she was panicked because what's going to be? All the stuff has to get back into the closets, hung up. Everything has got to be the house has to be and it was like that was creating a really unnecessary expectation. The truth is, after we spoke about it, the only expectation that she really needed to have, honestly, was that all her kids' school uniforms are accessible because they're going back to school the next day. And everything after that was like an expectation that she was putting on herself. And it was really, now, it was nice, but it certainly didn't warrant being in a bad mood, arguing with everybody, being irritated, not being able to sleep the night before, not being able to sleep the night of. No, that it did not warrant that. And so for that reason, it's really important that we adjust our expectations. B, okay, boss it back. What does that mean? Anxiety is, remember, it is not based on nothing. It's based on a reality that's a little bit askew. It's giving you a warning where a warning may not be needed. And so it's time to boss it back. If you have an idea in your head that something has to be, otherwise something bad is going to happen, right? Like, oh my goodness, what happens if my kids do not do their schoolwork? They're going to fail and things aren't going to go well for them. It's like, whoa, okay, so is there a part of that could be true? Yeah, but it's time to boss it back. And it's time to say, okay, no one's failing out of school just yet, just because they came back from a week and they're going to need some adjustment. Or just because my kids are not in a good sleep routine, does that mean that they're always going to be in this little, glitch of a time? And just because my child right now, let's say, is wetting his bed because he came back and he, hasn't gotten to the routine, and do all 7-year-olds, wet their bed? No, it's okay. It doesn't mean that the 7-year-old who kind of came back and, is having a harder time is going to be always doing that. And just because my child has become a particularly pickier eater because she's adjusting to what the different, dietary expectations are from going from matzah to bread, and just because my child's class has now taken down all their partitions, and so she is showing clinginess or irritability and not wanting to go necessarily back to school, we need to boss back the voice that says, it's going to be like this forever. There's a disaster happening. This is hard. No. No, there's no proof that that's going to be so. And so our job is to find a good reason why this is not so, to normalize it, and to say, I've done transitions before. My kids always fall apart for a week to 2 weeks, right? And then they bounce back, and I should have remembered that, right? Or normalizing it. Everybody feels this way sometimes. Or you know what? Maybe I just need a little tweak here and there, and I can get some advice. I have what it takes. I don't need to succumb to this level of anxiety and let it just be a downward spiral. So that's really important. And the truth is, when we're talking about what we could do with our kids, just kind of fast forwarding for a minute, helping our children boss it back is really, really important. It is important for them to be able to verbalize, I was afraid of this, and I'm thinking that this is going to happen, but that's not really going to happen. You know how I know it's not going to happen? You know how I know that the monster isn't going to come through, the floor? Because I've been living for 8 years right now, and it has never happened before. So the likelihood of that happening is just not going to be. We boss it back. We help them to boss it back. Because the truth is, all the ideas, they're all coming from us. So as creatively as our anxiety is in trying to warn us, that's how creative we can be in bossing it back. Okay. C is calm. Now, as we were talking about before, the reason that we have this anxiety is because there's a part of our brain that got triggered, right? The emotional part of our brain got triggered into being fearful or worrisome or thinking that there's a danger. So in order for us to be able to get back our smart part, to be able to get back to really problem solving effectively and coming up with a plan for our worries, right? So how am I going to address the 5 million things that I'm expected to do this week, having come back from vacation, right? So it's not going to be with myself on heightened alert. That's not happening because the best part of me, my problem solving capability, is gone if I do that. So I definitely don't want to do that. So how do I get it back? So breathing, mindfulness, taking a step back, really visually and mentally trying to get back to calm. And for everyone, that's something else. For those of us that could do the deep breathing or yoga or visualization or meditation or, just listening to nothing, to listening to music, to anything that we can do, with the idea being that it is really important for us to get back to calm. And when we do that, when we spend a little bit of time, calm is the key. And if we can do that, then we get our smart part back. And then we really can truly come up with better ideas of what to do. Okay. And by the way, that is so crucial for our children. Being able to help them to get back to calm and then to react is primary. And so when they see us doing it, it's invaluable. Like there's nothing that is more valuable than modeling for our children what we want for them to be able to cope with whatever their reality is. Okay, that's C. Now comes D, which is diet. Diet and do it for myself. So interestingly enough, and I don't know because I'm not a nutritionist, but I have spoken with several nutritionists and done some research. And it happens to be that when we're of heightened anxiety, here are some of the things that we shouldn't be ingesting into our body: caffeine, alcohol. And I know people say, well, of course I took some alcohol to be able to, kind of take the edge off. So again, the research shows that isn't the best idea. Probiotics, and I don't know, aside from yogurt, what other probiotics. So if anybody has some ideas for probiotics, that would be helpful. But in general, really getting in touch with giving to your body. And that, of course, means sleep as well. I know for myself, it was very, very hard to be able to get a certain amount of sleep when there's so much to do. But it's counterproductive when it doesn't help your system, because your system does so much better with that extra sleep. But really being able to, the diet of, helping yourself by giving something to your body is important. That also could mean, FYI, that if takeout is the way to go this week because it was just harder, or taking something from the freezer, or not having gourmet food, making just sandwiches for your kids instead of something major for lunch, doing it for yourself is also focusing on the food that you might not be ingesting. But it's also just helpful to be able to just give yourself that extra edge so that you can get through all the other tasks and expectations that you need to do. Okay, now comes E. E is exercise. This is something that parents and children alike. 20 minutes of aerobic exercise helps the natural endorphins. It helps make you feel stronger, more capable. I know many of us who were able to kind of get more exercise over the vacation. It just feels very different when you get outside, when you're able to get that sunlight, which that by itself helps. But just being able to exercise, to energize, is really helpful with kind of helping the anxiety to go down. I know that there's just, so much time in the day and it's so hard, but this is something that I definitely would not skimp on. It's really, really important. Okay. So that is the E. And, I think that in general, I think that for children, it is really important that we show them that we care about our bodies, because like I was saying before, the body is where some of the anxiety, the symptoms show themselves. So if we can show our kids through, the exercise that we're doing or that they're doing, that they can also get their heart beat up. Like, yeah, the anxiety made your heart go up, but you know what else did? I'll tell you what else did. What else was that you could do it yourself through the, amazing amount of exercise that you're doing. And that is tremendous. And I see here that there's another question that came in okay. So is there a specific type of exercise that's really good? So I think aerobic exercise is better than non-aerobic. People love yoga because it kind of has that meditation, or like that, the breathing capability in addition to the aerobicness of it. But I think that just, anything that you feel is going to get your heart pumping and get your mind kind of clear and get those natural endorphins up. I think that all of those things are really good. Okay. So, it's really important that, okay, now let's get to F. So F is friends or a way to distract yourself. Only being focused on the task at hand, being so narrow focused is perhaps, positive in a sense, but it's oftentimes a symptom of the anxiety. Like, you can't see it any other way. And I think that it's important that, we get support. We're human beings, and it would be nice to, sometimes it's good to escape for just a little bit. We want for our kids too, if you're going to focus the whole time on that which you're, focused on, and that's something that's bringing you anxiety, that's not going to do you any good. Really what it's going to do is create a continuous pattern of anxiety. It's good for the flexibility that you think of something else, hang with someone else, do for someone else, friends, or, that the capability to think of someone else besides for yourself is oftentimes one of the best antidotes to feeling anxious, because you switch the focus and you're flexible to be able to be either giving or forgiving. And when you break just that pattern of behavior, when the one thing that you're thinking of and you kind of engage in something else, then oftentimes anxiety kind of pops also. What I mean by that is, I'll give an example. There are some times where parents are asking me, well, my kid has to have a routine, an exact routine each and every time. I have to do 3 kisses, 1 hug, say goodnight and close the door. And it's like, well, they're fixated, like it's only on that. And that's definitely more of an anxious response. And so what I oftentimes suggest is if we just change, if we're flexible just a little. So, with one of the kisses, you sit down instead of you stand. And we hold the child through and we kind of just titrate just a little bit, one little iota of a difference. Oftentimes, the whole series, everything breaks and the anxiety pops, and the child is now kind of free to be able to not be so entrenched in that one type of, anxious experience. And so it's important if you can recognize that instead of being so narrowly focused, you can either make time for a friend or be giving in some way, thinking about the other, then oftentimes that will help just to distract. It's kind of like your commercial break, but it really goes a long way in changing things up. And G, okay, so get it out, and what do I mean by that? So we as human beings, oftentimes, if we hold it inside, and I'm not just making a pitch because I'm a psychologist, but if we hold it inside for too long, what happens is it festers and it grows and it takes on a life of its own, so that the anxiety from being just a warning can become really significant and really something that weighs us down even more. So oftentimes what I suggest to parents, and this is something for kids too, is get it out, write it out, talk it out. Make sure that what you're doing is communicating or just experiencing it out. And oftentimes that could be in the form of a journal. It could be in the form of just writing it down on a paper. It could be a form of a voice note. But then what I like to suggest to do, and kids, this is something for kids for sure, is then take the worry, the what if, and rip it up. Erase it. Voice over it. Make sure that you say no more. And this is part of that boss it back experience, but it's really good to get it out and rip it up. It's not something that's going to hold me back. It's something that I have more control over if I get it out and I let it rip. And I do believe that, sometimes I've had patients who have, written it out and ripped it up and then left and kept like one little teeny itty bitty paper that they kind of stuck in their pocket. Like it's still a little, I haven't been able to give all of it up, but that's okay, because at least you gave up 100 of those little itty bitty papers and one of them is still there, but that's authentic. That's fine. That's what we'll deal with. We'll deal with a lower level. That's really taking the voice of the anxiety and literally, lowering the volume. So that's a G. And, again, that is a big pitch for communication, because communication is really, really key. And then finally, H. So H is a hierarchy, right? If anxiety tells us everything is the same, and especially with, our kids also, it's like every single part of the what if, they're all equal. They're all just as bad. They're all just as important. When I had mentioned about the mom who really cares to make sure that everything is back in the closet. So to her, the shirts, the skirts, the pants, the sweaters, the nice clothing, the socks, they were all equally important. But really, when we spoke about it, it really wasn't. What was as important was the school uniforms, and perhaps, to take care of the very fancy clothing because you don't want those things to get ruined. But the other things were not as important. And when we put in a hierarchy of the importance, and it changed things up, right? If all of my child's, academic goals are all equally the same in the moment, like everything's exactly the same, then you're not really thinking. But if it's like, okay, so it's this week's tests, or, just these particular subjects because she's not doing so well on those, or, she does have her, SATs coming up. So let's put that as a primary importance. When you put things in a hierarchy, then number one, it shows that you're organizing it. Number two, it's realistic, because remember what I said, anxiety, what it does is it takes a piece of reality. It takes the idea that, that we have, the rule. So the rule is children should do their best in school. So, but that doesn't set a stage for how much of the academic expectations are equal. No, every subject might be different, or every week might have different expectations, or, there are some things that are more valuable, less valuable. Anxiety doesn't tell you that. It bunches it all together. That's what creates the warning. It doesn't specifically go through realistically what the warning is. And so if you're going to follow anxiety's hierarchy, then you're not going to do as well as if you set a hierarchy for yourself. And a hierarchy for yourself is really important because it allows for you to perhaps organize your experience. And also, once you have your rule, right, more clearly defined, then, like I say, rule, tool, connect, then you go to your tool and it's like, okay, wait a second. So now I can use my best tools for my most important things that I have to do. And I can then, lastly, connect to the people that I'm doing it with. I am not going to be a yelling maniac telling everybody to do everything and yelling at them. No. Now I could take it down a notch. I could say, okay, so it's going to be this week, or just for you, it's going to be for those tests. You, it's going to be for you just getting up in the morning. And you're an adorable 3-year-old. I don't have to, insist that you study your ABCs every day. And so whoa, I'm reconnected with my family because I set for myself expectations and limitations on where I'm going to put my most value, where I'm going to put in a timely fashion what I'm going to do. And in that way, what I can do, what I allow myself for, is to be able to then follow my rule, use my tool, and most importantly, connect. And by doing that, we set the stage for our children to be able to get a better handle on their anxiety too. Their anxiety, and this is something that we will definitely pick up on with next time, and their anxiety, which is similar to our own, has a lot of similarities, right? But they're also looking to see, is the kingpin, the queen of the house, is she able to manage her anxiety? Is she able to have a sense of calm? If she's showing me, how to breathe, if she's showing me how to get it out and rip it up, if she's showing me how to prioritize, how to boss it back, then to do exercise, how to stay calm, then I can believe in her when she tells me, this is what's going on for you. Hey, let's try this, right? Then she's putting her money where her mouth is. So I'm going to believe her a lot more. And some of those exact tools that I, for myself, am trying, my child can do in her way. And the expectations that I have for myself, if I can lower my expectations on myself, I can definitely lower my expectations on my child, and then ultimately help her to lower her expectations for herself. Not to the point where she's not expecting anything from herself, but perhaps just taking it down a notch and understanding that not everything is a disaster, and that anything in the social realm, in the academic realm, in the sleeping realm, in the living well realm, in the feeling good realm, all of those things are a lot more in our grasp than we really perhaps may have thought. And that these moments, the moments when we are off balance, off kilter, not exactly on solid footing, are all something that we've experienced before, we'll experience again. And it's nice to know how we're able to bounce back, and perhaps not able to bounce back as slowly or as quickly, with smiles or with frowns. But if we have to understand anxiety, then I'd really love to be able to leave you guys with the idea that we have an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H to be able to get back to the I, to myself, right? And it's really important that we allow for the process, we keep on trying, and we're as consistent as possible. Now, that consistency could be in the form of the flex chart, right? Different behavioral ways that we can kind of give to ourselves and to our children. It's also important, like what we spoke about tonight, that we identify what are the core, what goes behind the scenes, so we can fully understand what anxiety is, what it isn't, and that we can always have it as a small problem, a middle-sized problem, and a large problem. Those things that we can handle ourselves, those things that we ask for help, and those things that we get professional help. And some of our children are just predisposed to being more anxious. And there are times in life where they are more anxious. I'm going to be giving a cohort soon on anxiety related to camp, either first-time campers or kids who are separating from their parents in any sort of way. Mostly with regards to going to camp. But that's because there are anxious kids and there are anxious times in life, and when the two kind of come together, then we have to just empower through more tools and more planning. But as I started with, two things. Number one is anxiety is, and all feelings are not the enemy. They're not necessarily our best friend either. They're somewhere in between, and we have to embrace it. And then number two, just like I learned from the Seder, it's really important to believe that we fundamentally are the best that we have all of the tools to be the best that we can be. We just have to bring them out and appreciate that we don't need to be somebody else. We just need to be ourselves and continue to grow and work on ourselves. So thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.